rate is only for nurses,
You can, yeah, no, it's for everything.
for every.
Yeah, we wanna do this for all of our labor, okay? Because you wanna figure out, the contribution of all your techs, all your unit secretaries, all of your nurses and so forth.
So we're using that total salary and benefits.
Yeah, do it under labor. Your total salaries and benefits budgeted versus the total hours budgeted, that'll give you your average hourly rate from a budget standpoint, and you do the same thing for actual. And you'll get the difference in that. And what I'm curious about is, I don't know that you guys have ever looked at it in that way. So I want you to kind of say, well, I was budgeted for a labor mix of $30 an hour, but I'm actually running $37.50. Because it kind of opens your eyes. Some of it's legitimate. You know, in Sarah's case, she's opening a new unit, she's a startup, she's got a high contract labor issue right now. We know that. That's an explainable issue. But when you build the budget, part of our control is hours, but part of our control is the dollars from a managerial control standpoint. So you have to look at it at both sides, and that's what these three formulas do. Has everybody got that? Before we move forward.
So you want us to calculate in it
For May,
for our May,
Yeah.
our report?
off of your product, off your reports, that's
I
correct.
just wanna give you, ways to consider, I know what I'm looking for.
So this is May, so these are your hours. So for May, your patient days, you had an actual of 540. So you had actual 540, you got a budget of 389, budgeted 389. You know what your work hours standard is off your budget grade, for budgeted, okay? And then you know for hours that you actually used in total hours for May, whatever it is here. Total hours right here, right? So then, those are what your numbers are.
Your hourly wages on this party.
And then you will back into your average hourly
Right here,
rate
the salary
by
expense
virtue
ran
of
out.
looking at,
Otherwise, you can take your total pay, your total payroll dollars divided by your total
for
hours.
salary and benefits, your budgeted
Payroll dollars
Your total dollars
133
divided by total
against the
hours.
budgeted number of hours,
Total dollars and
5205,
payroll
right?
dollars.
So you divide the 133 by 5205, that would be the
So that
budgeted
means
hourly
right here,
rate, same way for
salary
salary
and
and
benefits.
then do the calculations. Okay?
Great.
All right, questions so far? You're gonna probably, and I suggest just follow the formulas in the book, because they're exactly as I just showed them to you. Again, just like the budget worksheet, if you run into a roadblock, something doesn't make sense after you've left here and you're reading your reports, call me. I'll walk you through what numbers to look at to get there. Because what I really want to hear is I want you to kind of say, okay, for May, which part of my operation contributed the most to my positive or negative variance? And I really want you to kind of see how you're doing in terms of your average hourly labor mix, too. Because what do we focus on from a variance control standpoint most of the time? What do you hear about all the time? What was the source in the fundamental saying in the email about coming to see labor ops if you're underproductive? That we're focusing on hours. We have to focus on both sides, dollars and hours. We control the labor mix as well. And beyond travelers, there are ways we can control that daily labor mix in our choices. And we'll talk about that in just a bit, okay? All right, so we got that. So let me switch back. And review these real quick. So efficiency is the number of care hours provided. Volume relates to the number of patients cared for. And cost is how many dollars were spent to deliver that care. Those are your three areas. And again, which is a concern and which is not a concern? Which is most concerning? Efficiency. Which is least concerning? The volume. And cost is still a concern. Okay? Because you can be efficient but have to be out of whack in cost. And if you're just strictly looking at hours, you would never recognize that. So that's important. So these are the actual calculations, and you have these in there. We ran down these calculations. These are straight out of the book. We explain how to calculate the different ratios. okay?
Productive hours or all,
For this.
or care hours.
Now, you can do it, you want to make sure that your hours net, or your average hourly rate is relative to total pay. So use total pay. Because it's going to give you fundamentally the same thing. Okay? When you do these, you add them all up. So in this instance, I had a positive or bad efficiency variance. I spent too much money. I lost money on volume because volume went down. And I had a positive cost variance because my average hourly rate went up. So then you add those together and I get an overall total negative variance, or spent too much money by $36,500. But what I did is I know specifically at this point how much efficiency issues contributed to that, how much the change in volume contributed, and how much the cost, change in cost on an average hourly basis contributed. Okay? Questions? Can staffing be made more flexible based on actual volumes? Have I not shown you that already in how we're building budget for 9/30? Yes, we should. To your point about the budget grid, I think we get a little too fixated on the budget grid, and so we get off track with what actual volume is relative to that grid allocation. Okay? Because it's not always going to exactly match up relative to an expected productivity ratio. Is the appropriate skill mix being utilized? So what are our choices around skill mix? What do we do around skill mix? Do we run heavy on nurses, light on techs, or vice versa?
I think
Sometimes. What are some of the choices we intentionally, organizationally, this is kind of an organizational choice as a base budget standpoint. How heavy are we on LPNs in our team care environment? Do we have team care? No. You see that in other places, so that would be an example of choices in the skill mix being utilized. And then you want to look at how do internal reports compare to prior months? So you're always trending month to month. Are you becoming more efficient or less efficient in that ratio that you calculate? So cost variance considerations, changes in wages. We haven't done a structure change yet. That would be an explainable change. If we did a mid-year structure change for nursing, that would be an explainable variance because we may not have caught the budget up to recalculate to that new change. Again, is the appropriate staff mix being utilized? Because if you have an overall expected of 30 and you run heavy on nurses, you're inherently going to run that up to say 32, 33, 34 potentially, and vice versa. This is the big one, more costly labor, and we had to bring in a bunch of travelers from cost. And what about this one? Is there a need to fill existing vacancies? Let me ask you about that traveler you filled your last vacancy. Here, we all know that. You're like, wait a minute, that happened. What about that last traveler we plug into our last vacancy relative to this? Would we need them? What would be an alternative for that? If we're only talking about 0.9 FTEs. Can you run it with overtime? What if you were running an average, if you were a 5-to-1 unit, you were running an average ratio, you've been trending an average ratio of 4.75. Would it make sense just to not periodically staff at some point, or would you change the staffing mix all the way around, rather than bring that travel in? So these are the options we look at from a cost standpoint, relative to scheduling and the other ratios we're looking at. From a management perspective, to see what's the best alternatives that we may have, but still be balanced. Because remember, we're talking numbers. What's the goal? Balance. Cost is balanced with standard of care, balanced with employee engagement, safety, and so forth. Okay? All right, so that's the end of that. Let's get real quick into how do we do this on a daily basis. So, this is a fully built month, and I'm going to walk you through this, so let me blow it up a little bit. Cell likes to not talk, cooperate. You need a way to look at this on a daily basis, right? And I think we've heard that you guys did have at some point something similar. I've taken a department and blinded it. The ones in yellow again are the data points that you need to input each day. The rest will take care of itself in the calculations once you get a hold of it. Okay? But I've taken the entire month of May for a department. I just won't tell you which department it is. And I've taken their census, their budgeted census, and I've taken their actual census, and I've pulled their actual hours used. And so what it does is it begins to calculate the different variances on a daily basis for me, okay? So for instance, on day 1, budgeted for 20, actual census of 15, we got a negative variance of 5, okay? The actual census expected hours is that standard for the department. That's from the budget, right? Times the number of patients they have. Okay, so they should have used 200 on a volumetric basis, on a census-based concern. They should have used a little over 204 hours. They actually used 213 hours. So they've got a negative daily variance on hours of 8.85. They used 8.85 hours too many. So in day 1, did they overschedule? Fundamentally, did they overschedule? No, actually, I will argue they didn't.
Scheduled for 22.
I will actually argue they didn't. I will actually, because what you're inherent in here, think about this. Where would you expect to see an overschedule? And let me scroll down a little bit. There's actually one in day 3. Look at day 3. What's the hour variance in day 3? 19.24 hours. So they probably do have at least one 12-hour shift of overschedule in day 3. Okay? And then you go on down to day 13. What happened in day 13?
That's a 63.
That says 63 hours over day 13. So there is about 5 shifts over schedule in day 13 for some reason. I don't know why. I haven't dug that deep. So remember I went and said that most of the time I'm not seeing departments grossly overschedule relative to volume. I'm seeing something different. What do you think is different in this department that's causing this daily variance of 8 and 8, 7, and 7 hours? And this department is running, this department's a 4-to-1 department.
Could you have people maybe in class and then be coded correctly approaches and
Well,
bunch of
Well,
ways?
I cheated you a little bit. I actually went and looked at Kronos at the time cards for this department, so I know exactly where the problem is.
Is it just a coding issue?
Nope, not a coding issue.
A lot of vacation time?
Nope. So what I will tell you in this department is I look down the listing, I see somebody scheduled for 12,
Or 16?
and they work 12.5. From an efficiency management standpoint, I said efficiency is the worst thing that we have. What is this? Either early clock in or early. So my point in this is when you're managing, I can't, each one of you's got a varied number of total people on per 12-hour shift, right? So maybe 5 nurses, 3 techs, a unit secretary, charge nurse. These little things add up in a hurry. This is predominantly what we're seeing from an efficiency standpoint, is that people, to your point, are following volume. But how many hours, total hours are we talking about here for the month, for this year? Let's see. Here we go. All the way to the right. 337 hours over. So what's the productivity of this unit? Somebody take and divide 7431 by 7768, you tell me what you get. I can do it real quick in Excel. Let me just do it. %. 95.7%. Huh? What's that? No, no, I know whose it is.
I know too.
Nobody in this room.
No, I know.
Nobody in this room. But I use it to make a point. Because we oftentimes think that we're just simply overstaffing, right? That's majority of not the case. But can you see from a daily management standpoint how a little bit each day can get you in trouble in a hurry? So let's go through the rest of this. And you're going to be able to use this. Down here at the bottom, I've got some additional formulas. So down here I've got cumulative daily hours variance. So what this is doing is each day is adding up the total days, total hours of variance, month to date for that point in time. So at day 3, it said 8.85 plus 8.83 plus 19.24 equals 36.22, right? So the average daily hours variance just gives you what that average each day is. So you can see kind of how you're doing. The equivalent person shifts to cut is simply this divided by your expected shift length. Again, a person shift in our world is 12 hours on average, right? So in this instance, we needed to cut, if we're on day 1, to get back on track, we need to cut. On day 2, we need to cut 0.75 of a shift in 24 hours. Does that make sense? So as you go along, you can see how you're doing in that regard, okay? The additional daily person shifts to cut is the incremental change between the two. There's a point in that, okay? So the days remaining is there for a reason. I told you there's a cut point. So what in your world, let me ask you this. If you're running this department and you need to start cutting hours equivalently to a person shift, i.e. 12 hours at a time, what would be safe for you to start trying to figure out how to get out of your schedule? Half a shift? 1 shift on a daily basis? What might it be for you? Or have you thought about it? So let's say in theory it's 1 shift per day. Let's say in theory we felt like based on the ratios and acuity levels we could begin to cut to get back on track 1 shift per day. Where at in the month is my break-even point so that I don't have enough time left in the month based on these run rates to cut the appropriate number of hours back out to get to 100% productivity? Where do you think it is? And how would you read it on here? And let me do something so that you can see the columns. I'll fix something. Where did you? Now we can scroll over here. Equivalent person shifts to cut is the key formula you're looking at. So where at do the equivalent shifts to cut, because it's what I'm saying here is 16 shifts to cut to get back on track at that point, where at does 16 shifts cross the days remaining to be able to do that? 16. That's assuming that you're safely thinking you can cut 12 hours a day out of your schedule. Can we realistically do that?
Probably not.
Probably not. More likely, it's more likely going to be 6 or less hours potentially. Maybe getting somebody to agree to go home a couple hours early here or there, depending on what's going on. So it may realistically be a half a person shift or 6 hours. So let me ask you this: if it's that, at what point do we cross? If it's half a person shift. Way back in here. at some point,
So Steve,
way back in here.
if we're tracking it on, if truly we track it on a daily basis, would it not be better to try to correct this in the beginning of?
Immediately and incrementally. What is my point here? You're exactly on my
Yeah.
point. That's what I want to hear.
Okay,
By doing this on a daily basis, I can see immediately in day one, I already have a problem, right? How quickly can I get my census? Let me go back to day one.
Are we using actual census as midnight?
Yeah, you have to use midnight because that's what our budgets are built. That's what you're credited for, is these are midnight censuses. These come off the budget census worksheets. So on day one, at the end, by day two, I know I have a problem already, right? And if I go to day three, I say, well, let's see what happens in day two. I'm seeing a fairly consistent run rate here, right? So by day two to day three, I've already got to be thinking about what do I need to do? Now, how do you correct this? What have I already told you about this issue right here?
Stop there.
What have I already told you about this? What is this? It's an efficiency issue around end of shift and beginning of shift management. Us as CEOs, part of our job is to be sure that A, people clock in by policy no more than 7 minutes before the shift. And then B, do we have everything designed accordingly so that they're supported in a way and their cycle times are in a manner that they can walk out the door when they're supposed to or as close as possible? Absent of an unforeseen circumstance about 4 deliveries walking in at 5:45, and oh well, it happens. But what is the controllable aspect of this? Now, some of what I've seen is 12 hours, 13.1, 13.2, 12.75. This is typically what I'm seeing down the list when I look at days. So what is this really? Probably holding over for documentation or something else, okay? And I don't know, and I'm not going to presume in your environments how you guys handle real-time documentation and whether that's efficient or not. That's not for me to decide, that's for you as the managers to decide. But these are the things that we're seeing incrementally that are getting us to where we are in a lot of the departments. So when you add that up, and let's say this department is, you know, a $30 an hour department on average, those 300 extra hours, you add that up across 100 units, even if we're, you know, 98, 99% on budget, those little things make a difference. So this is my point in this, from a daily control standpoint, have a mechanism. Where can you get these numbers from very quickly? So you need your actual hours used and your census. You know what your midnight census is, okay? So you want me to show you in Kronos where that lies. Let's go to Kronos real quick. I'll have to log in. But does this make sense? In determining where your break-even point is. Because that's one of the keys. There is a point of no return based on your operational circumstance. You don't have very much room. You're staffing a charge and 2 nurses. And I think 1 tech a lot of times. Is that your tech? 2 techs. So you don't have a lot of flex in that percent, right? So you have to be very cautious in practice.